So after sitting through the absolute snooze fest that was Wolfman in theaters this past week by Leigh Whannell, felt like I wanted to be a little bit more optimistic this week and review a movie by him I actually enjoy. That movie obviously is The Invisible Man. Now this movie has kind of a reputation. I feel like a good amount of people actually enjoy it. I'm not super fanatical about elevated horror, which this definitely dabbles in. But I think this is a good example of a movie that does it really well and quite creatively. And it's kind of doing its own little spin on domestic violence and how it lingers with a person. This movie can be interpreted in many ways. But if you're unfamiliar, it stars Elisabeth Moss as Cecilia. She's just getting over this incredibly abusive relationship with her ex, who eventually passes away. And she feels like she's being tormented him after his death, and he is the Invisible Man. That's the basis of this film. And let me just start off by saying I think Elisabeth Moss might be one of, if not the most underrated actress in Hollywood. I don't think she's ever taken on a project I don't really enjoy. I think she's fantastic in this film. In fact, she's probably the most important part of it, because you're going to spend so much time with this character, Cecilia, who is just completely broken. And she sells you on this, and she's very likable. She feels like a person who's beaten down, she cannot catch a break, all because of the performance of Elisabeth Moss. Again, horror does not ever get noticed by the Academy. This is a performance I think is absolutely phenomenal in horror, and I think she really carries this movie. Obviously, this is a reimagining of the traditional story, The Invisible Man, but it's kind of saying what would happen if an abusive ex passed on, like the trauma that leaves you with. Again, not super into elevated horror, but I think this movie's done creatively enough that it really does give this reimagining its own purpose, as opposed to just doing a scene-for-scene remake of a traditional monster movie we've seen a dozen times. Starting with the opening scene, I think this movie has an incredibly intense and effective opening. Watching waves crash on the shore when they introduce the cast, but then watching this woman Cecilia wake up in the middle of the night next to this abusive ex, and kind of Metal Gear Solid her way out of his place, trying to get out without being noticed because, again, she is fearful of him. Deactivating alarms, trying not to upset the dog, trying not to make any noise whatsoever. It's a very intense opening in my opinion. So the first 10 to 15 minutes of this film really set the tone for what it's going to be, how you're going to feel, more importantly, throughout the entirety of it. Because I would classify this not really as a scary movie by any means, but a movie that is effectively tense. It's suspenseful in what you're watching these characters go through, because it is a frustrating watch to some extent. You're spending a lot of time with our main character, Cecilia, but she's a completely broken character. The way she feels about herself, the way she feels about her ex, her relationships that are becoming damaged. So it's kind of frustrating and hard to watch, because you're really rooting for this character who's likable enough. She's played very well, but she cannot catch a break. Very important, though, that it never gets to the point where she becomes unlikable or you stop caring. I feel like the entirety of this movie, you really want her to succeed, and that is the most important part. To its core, this movie kind of is a character study of you just watching this person devolve into madness and deal with this inevitable presence. But I really do like the character dynamics of this movie. I like all of the characters. I like the friendships. I like the way they're acted, the dialogue. It's kind of a Leigh Whannell staple. That's really why I loved Upgrade as well. I think the guy just really knows how to write characters that are subtle but smart, and they have witty dialogue. To me, it feels very natural. It feels like this is how people would actually talk, how they would act according to how other people are acting, these circumstances that arise with the Invisible Man. It feels like just about everybody in this movie is doing what you'd expect them to do if they were presented with this. Nobody naturally just agrees with what she's doing. They're very skeptical because it does sound insane. This person is obviously beaten down. She could have mental trauma, mental illness. So I really like the fact that you can root for this character, and everybody in the movie makes it feel a lot more realistic and a lot more believable, because they're not written to be dumbasses. I will always point that out and give it 2 thumbs up. As I said, this is not a scary film by any means, but I do find it effectively tense because of the way they frame the possibility of an invisible man lurking. I think this movie does a good job of that as well. A lot of elevated horror films, they kind of struggle with whether or not what you're watching is real. They kind of put you in a headspace where it's very predictable. This movie is very good at kind of disguising what could potentially be going on with this woman. You as the viewer know what this movie is about. Nobody inside of it knows it. We know the possibility of an invisible man lurking. And this movie, in some sense, is an elevated horror film. It's an allegory for domestic violence, as I've already said, but it does a good job of framing the possibility and keeping you guessing and wondering if what she's experiencing could possibly be an invisible man, or if it's all in her head. A lot of these movies struggle to stick the landing on this. I think this movie does this effectively well. And for that reason, it is tense, it is suspenseful, and I do find there to be a couple of legitimate scares or just tense moments that are highly effective. And that's saying something because this is not the type of movie I think would really naturally elicit that response in me because they don't usually work. But there are a lot of moments in this movie I found myself kind of on the edge of my seat wondering what was going to happen next. So credit to Leigh Whannell. And as the movie continues to go along, I think it does a good enough job at starting to fill in the pieces of what's actually going on based on your expectations. It's fulfilling. I feel like this is a story that's actually worth telling. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. If it sounds interesting enough, I recommend you check it out. I just wanted to put my thoughts out there and let everybody know if you have not seen The Invisible Man, if you like elevated horror, you want a reimagining of a classic monster tale done in a very creative way, I recommend you check this one out. I find it effectively tense. I think the acting is brilliant. I think it's a very creative spin on a familiar story, so I recommend you check it out and buy it on Blu-ray. I know it's been out for a little bit of time now, but if you have seen Invisible Man by Leigh Whannell, comment down below. Let me know if it worked for you. Was it too silly? Did you actually like the reimagining? And as always, if you haven't joined me down below, do so. I love talking movies with you, but I will see you in the next review. Peace.